Well, hello and welcome to this episode of Driving Forward. I'm David Williams. Logistics are becoming an important growth industry in South Africa with potentially lucrative opportunities for logistics companies. That's despite significant infrastructure challenges. On the show today, we'll be looking at what the future holds for the logistics sector in South Africa, from infrastructure development to emerging technologies that may help or disrupt the sector. And joining me in the discussion, I have Patrick Leary, who is publisher and editor of Fleetwatch, Kate Stubbs, who's executive head of marketing at Barloworld Logistics, John Edmeston, deputy CEO of Cartrack, and Andrew Shaw, transport and logistics leader for PwC in South Africa. And of course, we're also joined by our studio audience who could join in the discussion a little later. Well, I'd like to start the discussion. It's a big subject, but we have to take it in small bites. John, perhaps from your perspective of the company and you yourself, your experience in it, let's have a look. Give us the landscape of logistics in South Africa at the moment.
David, look, logistics is a huge word. Okay, it covers a plethora of things. As far as Cartrack is concerned, we sort of in the business of providing solutions for fleet owners, and the connectivity between the vehicle, the driver, the fleet manager, and of course also right through to the OEM for a multitude.
OEM, for those not in the industry?
Original equipment manufacturer, i.e. the manufacturer of the particular vehicles. And all of these people have an interest of one sort or another in the vehicle, its well-being, the cargo, safety, security on the roads, of course very important today, and the service and the productivity and efficiency of the vehicle and the drivers. So really the object is to drive profitability through the use of modern technology that's available, and as well as the safety and security on the roads, not only for the drivers, but also for purposes of the general public on the roads, because we know of the carnage that we face these days almost every day. Yeah. So we're in the business of providing those solutions.
You're talking about Cartrack now?
Cartrack as such. And likewise, it's not only in South Africa, but we move right up into Africa. And the technology is advancing all the time, so there's lots of new opportunities. The market is projected to grow worldwide at almost exponential levels. And there's new applications coming out all the time. You know, you look at the likes of Uber, disruptive technology, disruptive marketing.
Driverless vehicles?
Driverless vehicles, which aren't really a figment of our imagination anymore. Drones and all that type of technology, it can all be valuably used for the purposes of logistics. Yeah,
I wonder about some of these huge what do they call them? Huge trucks. Pantechnicons. Driverless. Would worry about that given South African roads and South African conditions, and driverless taxis would be another one. Some would say the taxis are driverless already, the way they carry on. But Kate, let's move to you. And we've got a picture of where Cartrack is, and Barloworld we know is a big and diverse global company. One gets in our studios a bit more prominence on the group results and so on. Correct, yeah. So let's focus now on the logistics, the scale, the scope, and where you see the landscape that John's outlined.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Barloworld Logistics is actually the smaller and the youngest division of the whole Barloworld group, and we started about 14 years ago, and really out of a group strategy which saw the huge growth of the logistics industry, not only locally but globally. And our aim from the beginning was to create a more integrated logistics company. As you said in the beginning, logistics contains a whole lot of different elements, and that's where we talk supply chain, which goes really from source to the end and includes not only the physical movement of goods, but also information and cash flows. So we like to look at the supply chain as a whole with our companies. So our goal and our presence is really still more Southern African focused in the Middle East. But that doesn't say we don't look at the flow of our customers' goods globally. We have partners globally. I think the industry is an exciting one. It's a challenging one, and you used the words lucrative earlier on. And I think lucrative is a big word. I think it's hard to make money, and logistics is often a grudge purchase. If you think about it, we as operators don't necessarily add a huge amount of value to a good. So if you're transporting cement, we're not making the cement stronger or better. We're just getting it there on time. So the value that we create is really about helping our customers realize their business strategies. So we've got to look at clever ways to do it smarter, faster, better, safer, to do that. And it's a great challenge, and it's forever changing. I think logistics is required whatever the state of the economy. We're in tough times now, but that gives opportunity to look at doing things differently.
I want to return, or at some point talk about the difference between transport and logistics. I don't think there was such a word as logistics in the old days. There certainly was transport by rail or by road or by air. But we've got two people who are actively involved with their companies out there on the ground, and two people, I think it's fair to say, who are more observers of this and analysts of it. So Andrew, let's pick up, you've got perhaps the more bird's eye academic view, looking at trends, analysing. What do you see?
As PwC, we have 57 locations across Africa, so we get a very good picture of what's going on. We essentially see kind of two logistics markets. So one is focused on commodities. Now we've seen a commodity downturn, and often for Africa the challenge is to try and reduce that logistics cost to make yourself commodity-wise more competitive than other nations around the world. And that has been Africa's big challenge in the past. So as the commodity price comes down, the challenge sort of intensifies. That's the one key market. The second one is probably inter-Africa logistics. We've seen it grow very fast. It's at around 11% as we've measured it in a recent document that we've released.
That's logistics within Africa, all over Africa?
Yeah, that's trade between African countries, right? So as opposed to other parts of the world, the EU and others where there is a huge amount of inter-country trade. So the countries are really trading with one another as big trading blocks. In Africa, we really are quite behind the curve. It would improve the growth of all their economies. It would allow certain economies to specialize in certain areas. And a lot of that is inhibited by trading blocks that don't talk to one another, administrative law between between countries that makes border crossings very long, and of course the challenge that you mentioned up front, which is infrastructure and the lack of sufficient infrastructure. And we see that played out even in the short sea shipping market, where countries actually can't use sea as a trading route because there is so many challenges to that logistics platform. So across Africa, that's the biggest challenge. And I suppose South Africa's, what it can bring is that it has a very competitive and well-developed logistics system and a number of very large players. And those potentially could play out in Africa, and many of them already are playing a substantial role in sort of building this logistics platform across the continent.
All right, that sets the scene from a PwC point of view. And then Patrick O'Leary is the publisher and editor of Fleetwatch. You write about these things a lot. How would you see things now, and how things are developing now, perhaps to 5 or 10 years ago?
The bigger companies have developed and are world class in this country. I'm talking about Barlow World, I'm talking about
Not
Imperial.
just Cushie's here.
This stuff, yeah, notice I mentioned opposition as well, Imperial. There are some companies, Unitrans, that are world class, but the majority is Africa. And I think the term you mentioned just now, the term logistics, I mean, what is logistics? You know, most people who are in logistics don't know what logistics is. You know, it's getting this Coke, a glass of water, I don't usually drink water, this Coke from here to there because Coke wants it and I manufacture it. That's what logistics is. It's take a truck or an aeroplane or something and get the goods to the consumer. Here, you have an accent on it. What is about logistics? What is it about trucking? It enhances your quality of life. Okay, it gives you goods every day. It gives you your supper on the table. That's the truck, the plane, and everything. What does it also do? It enhances a country's global competitiveness, which we desperately need. And also sustainable environment. The logistics industry has to look at its sustainability in terms of environmental impacts. Those three things are huge. An example, David, my logistics operation this morning, the city of Johannesburg failed me because I was held up so often at robots that aren't working. Now that's impacting on my productivity. It's impacting on my transport efficiency as a trucker. I'm sitting in the traffic burning fuel and I'm not getting to my destination on time. So my thing is, let's forget about this logistics thing and go back to say, We are truckers, we deliver goods, we're aeroplane pilots, we take goods into the things. John tracks them for us, you tell us how good we're doing, and then we're back to the basics. And why I say that? Because government hasn't got a clue in this country what logistics is, what trucking is, and its importance to this country in its overall scenario. It hasn't got a clue, because it's actually in a bloody shambles.
Although earlier comments, compared to the rest of Africa, we have very good infrastructure and so on. Kate, you were nodding for some of the things that Patrick was saying. What about his comment about logistics being a fancy word for transport in effect? And what do you understand as logistics as opposed to putting things on a truck and getting it to somewhere else? Is there a difference?
Well, transport is a large aspect of logistics, and if you say
But
transport,
what's the other aspect?
Logistics, the word comes from the art of planning, if you want to go back in time.
Okay.
So it's the art of planning. And yes, planning the best way to get that glass of water from manufacture to me to consuming it. So transport is a large element of planning, but it's understanding firstly what you're trying to do and getting it there in the most cost-effective way. And I love this, because to go back to simplicity, we're in the business of getting the right thing to the right place at the right time at the right place with the right person. I love that. It's simple, but I think what's exciting is it does affect every business around the world, even banks. Banks have logistics. They have cash flows. Cash needs to move. So logistics is about making the world go round, making things happen. And so transport is a large element of that, but you can't forget the art of planning and tracking. And I think the more sophisticated we go and the better we want to do it, you look at the rise of technology platforms and communication things to give us the data to be able to plan better or be proactive.
Give me some example of how the technology has changed things, and perhaps you can pick this up, John. In say 10 years ago or 5 years ago, you did things in a certain way. I recall working at SA Breweries, I always quote this, and almost watching the technology change while I was working there. I was there for 5 years. For example, delivery of and pickup of beer to be delivered to a particular place. So there's real-time registration of when they take a truck full of X number of crates of beer. On the way out, they swipe the card, and real-time that then registers as that number of crates moving out onto the road. It's not reported later. It doesn't go in at the end of the day. This is real-time stuff. So, and I asked, well, how does this affect? No, well, it enables them to make decisions so much faster about what is needed where, so they never run out. Well, that was an example I saw. It seemed simple, but as soon as the technology became available, they did it. But that's a while ago. So, John, 10 years, 5 years ago, where's the cutting edge now? What are you doing differently? What are companies doing differently that 5 years ago people said, you can't do it that way?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was talking with Kate earlier about Africa as a whole, as a continent. One of the big problems was when you leave South Africa, you lose connectivity with the vehicle and the driver, okay? Because it was totally cost ineffective to roam using GSM. You could pay anything from 100 Rand a megabyte of data to 1,000 or 2,000 Rand a megabyte. So nobody would be prepared to do that. Now today, we've got products that can roam at a fixed cost. We know what the cost is, and it's actually an economic cost. So I think that's a huge advantage for the additional trade going into Africa, for example. Then I think there's the connectivity to the driver. We now have these applications, the methodology. Everybody's got a smartphone. So now that's really the center of communication, is a smartphone. And I think it will be probably forever in our lifetimes. And now through these applications, you can provide a lot of information, task management, workforce management, change instructions to drivers, etc. Track the cargo that's in the vehicle as well. More specifically, items of cargo. Provide real-time billing capabilities. So for a driver who's out in the sticks somewhere, delivering his cargo to somebody in the Congo, for argument's sake, real time, the delivery's happened, you've got proof of delivery, boom, you can activate your billing system and bill and collect earlier.
Right. I'm going to come back to the whole panel in a moment to respond to Patrick's allegation that the whole thing's a shambles, okay, and maybe you could tell us a bit more about exactly what the shambles is, and Shambles was a part of London.
Really?
Yes, it was an area of London, and it took on the name of chaos.
A good part or a bad part?
Fairly bad, I think.
Okay.
But Andrew, one part of your job also is to look at where the technology is taking us, how problems are being solved. What are the key problems?
Well, I mean, we see logistics as transport as a component of something that deals with inventory, warehousing. So it's really about managing the whole supply chain for a customer. And quite often in Africa particularly, the places where you can lift cost out are in inventory holding and warehousing. Transport is a big challenge, and the infrastructure around transport, as I've mentioned, is really problematic. But in inventory and warehousing, there are really opportunities, because the whole world is moving towards a just-in-time type of scenario where you only need X number of crates of beer for the customers today, and you don't order any more than that. You don't need any more space, and you don't want to carry the cost of that product. So getting those systems right relies on the technology that says, how do I subcontract somebody? It also relies on the technology of where my product is, so kind of track and trace technology. And also there's a lot of much more sophisticated inventory holding technologies now. So it says, how many products do you have in place? If I go down the supply chain, how many products have I got in production? And if you can link all those pieces of information together, you can drive costs out and you can build more and more efficiencies in. You can also adjust to the market. So if we're selling a lot of beer today, we can adjust very quickly to those requirements. And so that the whole logistics environment needs to adjust to these kinds of challenges, and technology has become almost like a requirement. It's not a nice to have anymore.
All right, what I'd like to do here is, we've got the landscape, as I call it, set up a couple of problems and look at those problems and the degree of them, and then see how the industry individually and severally is responding, and maybe start with the shambles. You're indicating problems. What are the problems?
Okay, the problems, I think, start with non-recognition of the industry as a vital part of South African economy.
By government?
By government. And therefore, legislation is introduced, and legislation, the correct legislation actually stays on the table and doesn't get introduced. The wrong one does get introduced. Let me give you an example. The consignor legislation, now in normal term, that's the customer and the transporter, was introduced last January. That's to stop overloading, David, to stop overloading, so that both parties take joint responsibility. Yeah. Up to then, the shipper used to play the transporter like a puppet, one against each other. I want your rate, and now John's giving me a lower rate, but he has to overload to make a profit. So, but I don't care that you're destroying my road or anything, I'm the customer. So the customer also, is the customer king or dog? In many instances, the customer is an absolute dog. Doesn't care about the transporter. Now, that is supposed to bridge that gap. Nobody knows about it. It's been implemented. The cops don't know about it. The transporters aren't worrying about it because there's no enforcement of it. So that's an example of it. Legislation is perhaps needed, a good thing, but wrong. The state of the trucking industry out there does not get the attention from government. I just see government protecting Zuma and all this type of nonsense, you know, whereas the logistics industry is the true growth mechanism of South Africa. It's the growth engine, or the growth, help me, what's the word?
Yeah,
the growth thing of South Africa. The growth is manufacturing all that, but getting the stuff out into global, we're competing against China and all that. Now our logistics costs as a percentage of GDP is double that of America. It is 50% more than Japan and Brazil, okay? Why? Because we're not looking at things. My experience this morning, robots out of order affects our logistics costs. The bad roads out there. Now, government loves blaming the trucks and saying, you've overloaded, so you've messed up our road. Nonsense. That is part, but a lot of provinces have spent the money on other things and have not maintained the roads. And the last thing, David, is the state of trucks from operators themselves. We do a thing called break and tire watch, where we test trucks. Over the past 5 years...
Roadworthiness, you're talking about.
Roadworthiness. Over the past 5 years, we have tested hands-on. So I want to give you the exact figure here. There are my glasses. 644 trucks. We have failed 434. That is a 67% failure rate.
Right, let's pause there. We've got enough problems there for a week, let alone the rest of this discussion. So, Kate, now, I know what it's like when you're in business. You don't want to take on government too aggressively because you've got to work with them.
Correct.
But on the other hand, you have to influence them.
Yes.
So, your reaction to these issues, and to what extent is the industry influencing government?
No.
Yeah, I think it is hard. There's definitely great need for industry to engage government more effectively. I think we've tried. There have been various fora set up over the time. Our biggest question goes, so we've tried to, the dialogue we've tried to create, and as Barlow World Logistics created a study on the state of supply chains in South Africa. We're running it for the 13th year. Survey saying, where are we going as South Africa, and what are companies thinking of, what are the challenges? And it's very hard, number one, to get government involvement in that, but we have had conversations. I think there's a total disconnect between the strategy of what makes South Africa competitive and what type of infrastructure do we need to align to the competitiveness of the country and what industries. So you see, from a transit perspective, you hear lots of plans about we're developing these railways, we're doing that, but how are they aligned to business, and how is business aligning to that development? So I think there are pockets of great things happening, but there's certainly a lack of alignment going on at the moment. So there are pockets of excellence, and I think in South Africa we've shown that when we want to do something, we can do something exceptionally well. But typically, unfortunately, I feel the same way as Patrick, is there is a disconnect between business and government in terms of...
Patrick mentioned 50% worse than Brazil, 100% worse than the US, but us compared to the rest of Africa, Andrew, I don't know what the percentage is, but we're certainly perceived, and most hands-on experience is that we have better infrastructure and so on. Is it because this doesn't fall under anyone in particular in government? It's the transport, retailers, it's big businesses. No one's logistics, there's no Ministry of Logistics. There's a Ministry of Transport, but that's not what they're talking about.
I think the Department of Transport has had a focus on logistics. It is challenging to identify how effective they may have been there. I mean, essentially, here's the challenge is you need to bring down the unit cost of logistics, so a proportion of GDP, in order to be more competitive. And I mean, you can look at the research around the world. The more effective, or the lower your cost of logistics, the more effective you are as an economy, because it just unblocks trade. It's simple as that, right? But you also have to make sure that you meet the safety requirements. So you need to make sure that trucking is safe, not overloaded, etc. So you've got to kind of got these two dimensions, because what's pushing down on the one side is also trying to push down costs on the other side. And probably it's not only about policy with respect to government, it's also about how that policy is enforced. What trucks get pulled over, what is the mechanism to ensure that trucking is operated in a safe, effective way. You know, those kinds of things are critical.
Let's pause on that and ask John. I mean, quality control of the equipment and the balance between efficiency and safety.
Well, I think there's many ways you can enhance that, the safety as well as the quality. I mean, Patrick always alludes to the roadworthiness of vehicles and so on, and that's clearly a big problem. You know, these days it's actually very simple to tap into the CAN bus information of a vehicle and understand exactly what is going on with the vehicle. Are the brakes in working order? Is the driver wearing a safety belt, etc.? All those aspects are able to be covered now. There's camera systems for ensuring drivers are adhering to also the rules of the road in terms of, for example, distracted driving, you know, drinking and smoking and talking on your cell phone, or texting worse while driving, etc. These are all aspects which we know of, but I agree there's very little control about them.
And it seems like very little will.
And the trick is to get often the transporter as well to understand what those benefits are and take an active part in it, not just view it as an add-on cost. You know, countries that are successful seem to be those, not that are over-regulated, but that have sensible regulations. In the States at the moment, for example, there's a huge thrust on monitoring driver fatigue, being Patrick, you'll probably know the statistics, but being a huge contributor to accidents on the road. Where is that type of control and regulation? It's the easiest thing in the world to monitor using our car track technologies. Real time, you know, it's simple. So there's a host of features that the technology provides. It's to get people on the one hand to use them effectively, understand that there is a big return on investment, that's a payback of sometimes just a few months. Never mind the security of the vehicle, you know, the stolen vehicle recovery, cargo, lost cargo and the likes. So those are the challenges, but I think sometimes at some points the government has to intervene and lead by example and say, you know what, this is compulsory. Every vehicle over this mass, for example, ought to have a driver camera system or an hours of work monitoring system for drivers so that it can be checked by the authorities. I mean, rather than them having to scratch around under a vehicle, determine
if they even try at all.
If it's roadworthy or not, or how do they measure that the driver hasn't been driving for 8 hours?
All right, I'm going to call a pause there, John.
May I make just a point on that? I think we're forgetting about one of the most critical elements here, because we can talk technology and infrastructure, but logistics is still about people.
Yes.
And so it's about behavior, it's about leadership, it's about people, and critically, as we've seen, skills. And skills at all levels, from the lowest level of the right skills and training to guys even having legitimate driver's license to managerial skills and leadership skills, because that drives behavior. So you can have the best technology, you can have the best infrastructure, it's still about behavior and leadership and skills.
We're drawing to the halfway mark of the program, so I'm going to ask you each, just as a way of wrapping up the first half, if you had the magic wand and there was one thing you could change tomorrow that would make a big difference to the logistics sector, to the competitiveness of the economy. Because I'm not sympathetic at the moment, because I think in terms of a consumer, everything seems to work. The stuff's in the shops. You get to where you want to go. Sometimes there are delays, but mostly there aren't. So I'm thinking actually we're pretty good, but you're being quite critical. So what would you wave your magic wand over to change tomorrow? What would be the first thing to fix?
My magic wand would be my hand reaching out to government to saying, don't ignore us, we have experts in this industry, we're not your enemy.
Is this by the collar or by the throat?
No, by the throat, I think, at this stage. Okay? And say, don't ignore us, we have top experts in this industry that are vital to the growth of this country. We have a sector that is incredibly important.
So you'd wave the wand
I would
too?
say, work with us, bring us into the thing. I'm not anti-government, but I'm going to keep knocking them while I keep messing up.
Okay.
Come and work with us.
Kate?
Sure. I think then I'll keep on the people angle of skills, because if we're going to be successful, so our 100%, first one is Patrick's, second one is if we're going to be competitive as a country, we have to engage at all levels across the skills and education of our people.
Yes.
And the industry.
Okay.
Yeah, I like Kate's idea. It's things at the end of the day are people driven. Sometimes, however, you've got to have a bit of a push to get people to behave in a different way and get out of the rut. And being obviously in technology, I think we've got to say the authorities ought to understand what the technology is better and identify where it can be utilized to save lives and improve the profitability, as Andrew said, drive costs down, improve the whole economy and get the spin-on multiplier effect of that. So I think there's a real place for that, and we've seen it in the past, from when we're in stolen vehicle tracking and recovery. That industry, which has blossomed tremendously over the last 20 years here, has had a massive effect, I believe, sincerely, on crime control and given the police an additional tool to combat crime, and you can't do things without technology today.
I'm amazed that people can still steal cell phones, that they can steal any vehicle given the technology available. I mean, we should be able to detect any of this, and so I'm puzzled. Maybe it's something we can come back to. But Andrew, you wrap up. The magic wand.
I suppose the magic one for me in South Africa is to get road and rail to work more of an integrated way. And I think actually the big LSPs like Barloworld, Imperial, etc. need to take the lead there, because they actually hold this market and they need to try and integrate rail more effectively. And there's lots of barriers to that, but that for me would be something where we could really as an economy make a huge difference to the cost and efficiency of logistics. And then in Africa there's many challenges, but if we just sort out some of our border posts, I think we'd great
Sounds like
great step.
Border post would be a quick magic wand fix, because it's not like you need special technology and rocket science to make the border
Maybe
more efficient.
technology could actually
Could help,
serve to help it out.
But it's the human factor, the bureaucratic factor, more than the technology.
Get your corrupt guys up there.
I'm glad you mentioned road rail, because that would have been my magic wand if I was doing it. And I think that industry generally is not prepared to consider rail, because it would need long-term investment, and they want short-term, cheapest quickest way to do it. Don't fully understand rail, and I'm going to put that to the panel in a moment. But we're going to a little break now. We're coming back to pick up our logistics and transport and road and rail discussion in a moment. Well, we know the logistics landscape is changing all the time. Investments are made in infrastructure, future technologies. Welcome back to this episode of Driving Forward, and we're discussing future trends, perhaps more present trends up to now, but let's talk more about the future. And still in studio with me, we have John Edmeston from CarTrack, we have Kate Stubbs from Barlow World Logistics, Andrew Shaw from PwC South Africa, and Patrick O'Leary of Fleetwatch. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to pick up this rail thing. I'm a fan of rail, and I think it was the rail network of South Africa, one of the great railway networks of the world, that opened up the economy between roughly the turn of the 20th century and the mid-20s. Every railway line of substance, apart from the iron ore and the coal lines, was built in the first quarter of the century. And then that network continued until the 70s, really serving. And road was excluded by many legal obstacles, road permits and things like that. And then it was thrown open in the 70s. And I believe there was no care taken to say, well, let's not just let rail have to compete with road. Let's see where rail can do the best and where road can do the best. I sense, Kate, there's a hostility among business to rail, that they're impatient with Transnet, and that they just want, at the moment, the trucks are cheaper and more efficient, so let's just go with the road.
So I don't think there's a hostility. I think there's a deep frustration. Certainly from our clients and us as one of the larger logistics service providers, and I think I can talk on behalf of all the big guys, is we don't see it as a competitor, sort of a competitor to us. We're desperate to work with rail. It's a logical, the rail solution is complementary to road transport, and most of our clients are continually looking for
But just draw me a picture quickly before we take the rest of the view. So it's obvious that things like iron ore and coal, big, heavy commodities, lots of it, going to one place. So you have long trains which are kilometres long. That's easy.
Yeah.
Give me some examples of where rail is not being used at the moment, not on heavy commodities, but where we could use it more.
Well, most South African companies are importing goods, for instance. So we talk about our logistics costs being high in South Africa, and we do face a challenge of Johannesburg being 600 kilometers, to the closest port. So our transport costs are high. So if you're an importer of goods, and that's from retail goods to any type of goods, you need to get them from Durban to Joburg, or as one of the major hubs. So if you had proper, efficient, fast rail between Durban and Joburg, one of the busiest transport lanes there, we would be able to put all their goods on train to a certain extent. So it's not only the large heavy goods, it's people who are bringing transporting goods around the country on a line haul. You still need your secondary transportation, your transportation hubs to get to your closer ports, but you do need, I think nearly every single one of our clients would look at rail as an option. From Cape Town to Johannesburg, look at your, from farm, you've got your bulk grains goods, you've got wine, you've got alcohol, you've got all sorts of things being manufactured around the country for that long line haul section. Those things don't need to go on road.
Patrick, rail, you seemed hostile when I mentioned it earlier.
Hostile? Maybe we grab rail by the throat as well and bring it. Some years ago, Unitrans, road is not against intermodalism. It makes sense, as Kate just said. We're not against it at all. In America, when we had deregulation in America, which was the same as we had deregulation there, they were very intermodal friendly. So it's worked there. Unitrans, about 8-9 years ago, went to Spoornet with a concept called the railroader. It would have manufactured a product here, created employment. They're still waiting to hear, from Spoornet. They were so confident of that, they presented it at the investors conference. Nothing has come out of them. So let's grab them by the throat and bring them across.
And as you say,
it's not road that's against
you
them.
use Spoornet. It tells you how long ago it was, because Spoornet has been Transnet freight rail for a long time.
Thank you. And may I just also add, Barlow World, I think, has a memorandum of understanding or something with Spoornet, as has Imperial. And it was big news when they signed. What has happened with it? What's it about?
Well, we still have our MOU with Transnet, and I think
which drawer?
No, it's there. We're actively engaging them. But to your point earlier, you're not going to solve a rail solution today. But there are lots of opportunities that we're looking at in terms of some privatization of certain segments or offering rail services. But you have to work together and collaborate with many parties. It's not just Transnet and it's not just us. It is about looking at a solution, and there's specialists in the field that we are looking, and we've partnered with certain people to offer a wider solution, and Transnet are very open to that, and so we are engaging them, but it is a longer term solution, and so it's not going to be solved overnight.
And in the long term, we all did, as Mark Twain said.
Yeah.
I want to pick up with John in a moment with the technology on rail, because you're interested particularly in the technology on road. But you raised the road rail issue, so a bit more on that.
Look, what I see in the economy is that the big LSPs actually own the customers because they've been able to provide.
So what's an LSP again?
Logistics service provider. So Barloworld, Imperial, I'll definitely leave some out, so let's leave it at that point. They own the customers, and they've been able to offer these integrated solutions to customers. Transnet on the other side has been operating a railway service, and what you need to do is try and bring these two things together so that you can integrate Transnet's rail service into an LSP type offering. Transnet has also invested a lot of infrastructure recently, which has improved service reliability, but it's also pushed up price. So there is that challenge on the rail side.
And they're a monopoly.
In addition to that, but certainly that's where I see the space, is to kind of bring the logistics customer interface much closer to the rail environment.
Let's come back to that aspect. I'm particularly interested in, I mean, you are road technology. There's a very interesting company called ANSYS, which deals in measuring train loads and where loads are at a particular time, and telling customers where trains are, and how much is on them, and how long it's going to take. So that kind of technology is available for rail and road.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, well, our technology as it stands is applicable to trains, be it the locomotive and certainly for the carriages, you know, the cargo carriers.
Interrupting you, do you know South Africa is the one place where they stole a train? There was a timber train in KZN which was actually stolen. They came back and it was not there. The locomotive was stripped, it was taken away. The train was stolen. Your technology is needed.
No, for sure. And, you know, at the moment there is no real tracking system on carriages. So I think the railways don't actually know where all their carriages are. You know, they might have 100,000 carriages and only utilize 20,000 of them, for argument's sake. So positioning them, the maintenance thereof is all absolutely viable. And, you know, we have been in those discussions, but I must say we find the same thing. The wheels turn slowly.
Okay.
Well, can I, David, may I just add something there? I think with Kate's thing, the whole system, when you're going back to 20 years ago at rail, it's all changed now. We're talking just-in-time manufacturing system. In those days, Japan was the only one that had just-in-time. The world adopted it. Now, manufacturing plant does not hold stock anymore. It needs it just-in-time. And that is where the rail, inflexibility of rail, that is where road has taken over a lot. It's very flexible, it's very time critical, and thus tracking. I mean, we've got the technology. And that's where rail has to understand that its role has changed. You know, the role of the world has changed, and so the role of rail has changed.
Well, the amazing thing is,
and if they talk to the industry, we'll tell them how it's changed.
if you drive to Durban or Cape Town, you used to see trains all the time. You don't see trains now. It's possible to drive the whole way and not see a train.
David, I saw one the other day.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I saw one coming back from Cape Town. All the way I saw one, and one train, hundreds of trucks.
Well, that's the thing. So, here's a little thing for you just to think about before we go to the audience. I don't think the problem is the time of the journey from Johannesburg to Durban, say. I mean, a train can get there in good time in 12, 14 hours. Isn't the problem at each end? With where the road and loading interface, Andrew, you're nodding, deals with rail.
Yeah, look, there's no doubt that is where the problem is. So a lot of infrastructure has been invested in the intervening piece, but the terminals still represent the big challenge. I mean, there has been a huge rail renaissance in the States, in China, and a lot of that is also driven about where the location of those facilities are. Yeah. So if you can get factories and warehouses to locate very close to those terminals, you make it that much more efficient for them to operate within the logistics environment. Because this last mile cost of bringing a truck to a terminal and then moving a container to some really kills the rail model. So it's a spatial issue as well as a terminal operations issue.
But I'm saying it's not time. And at the back of my mind here is I went to a presentation by Transnet about a high-speed train to Durban, which you didn't take a packet of 30 cigarettes on the back of to calculate would probably break the national budget. Trillions of rand. You don't need it. We've got a 12-hour journey on empty railway tracks at the moment.
Yeah, so I think, sorry, misunderstanding. So it's not about the high speed, it's about the reliability. And I don't think we get the reliability or the availability, and there's a cost element at the moment where it's typically perceived that rail will be cheaper than transport or road transport. And sometimes we're not seeing that now. But it's much more about reliability. It doesn't matter how often, as long as it's reliable and that it's going to leave on that time and that it's going to arrive on that time, that's all you need to know.
So I take it
Then
no
you can
one's,
plan around it,
no one's recommending the high-speed train to Durban, which would cost trillions of rand.
Well,
David, to be fair to Transnet,
Yeah.
they have introduced a high-speed service on the existing infrastructure at
That's
very,
okay.
very little additional cost,
Exactly.
which has cut off a 5 or 6 hour transit time. But your point remains, the challenge still lies in the terminals at both the port
the coordination.
and then if it's in Gauteng at City Deep, there are still challenges in getting the box through that terminal and to a customer. And there's reliability as well as just timing issues around terminals.
Well, we could go on all afternoon on trains, but I don't think that's what we want to do. So I think what we're going to do now, before we get on to the African infrastructure and logistics story and South Africa's place in that, is a quick move to the audience here and see what questions or comments you might have. If you could just identify yourself, say where you're from.
Hello, my name is Bob. I'm from Riva Vehicle Leasing. Perhaps I could ask the panel's opinion on current fuel price. What obviously looks like is an ever-increasing fuel price, its impact on logistics, and perhaps the answer might lie in the move from road to rail. Thank you.
Two good big questions there. Who wants to take it first? Kate? You're involved with this every day. The fuel price, the week rand.
Well, I mean, the fuel price is the fuel price. We all faced with the same challenge. So obviously there are ways of managing that. But I think from a logistics service provider, our aim for our customers is to find the most optimized route. So the first thing is assessing how often you need to transport goods and to do that as effectively as possible. So I think in South Africa, one of the major challenges we have with lots of trucks on the road, lots of inefficiency, many trucks running empty loads. And so looking at platforms and flows to optimize your transport, so you're transporting as little as possible, as cost effectively as possible. We've also developed quite a few new, on the technology side, with trucks looking at greater payload. So it's like PBS, purpose-built trailers, trailers which are longer trailers, can carry a heavier load with still better impact on the road, which increases your payload and your efficiency. So there are lots of things you can do. The fuel price we can't really control, so it's a good incentive for us to find smarter ways of doing business.
Other responses to Bob's point?
Look, in respect of trucks, we see efficiency of engines in every new generation of truck, bringing increased fuel efficiencies, but the same is true on rail. Energy costs are a massive challenge for Transnet. The energy price, electricity price is increasing perhaps even faster at this point than the fuel price. So bringing technology in, or more efficient locomotives, is really key to making them more cost effective.
Let's go back to, Patrick?
Sorry. I think the fuel price, with a lot of misunderstanding, that is one thing where I won't blame the government, is that we don't have much control of it. The fuel price reached the bottom of a barrel just recently, excuse the pun, but at $29. Do you remember when it was over $100? Yeah. So it is so variable and flexible, but as Andrew says, when it was up high, the trucking industry overseas, which we benefit from because we get the products from there, responded so well with fuel-efficient engines, emission-free engines and all this. So the technology, again,
but those engines are available here?
Sorry?
They're available here?
They are. We could bring in Euro 6 tomorrow, but we don't have the fuel quality. Why? Because the government has... They've been tardy on coming to any decision on giving guarantees to the oil companies to invest 40 billion, which is now about 100 billion by the way, John. And so that's not going to happen. I don't see us getting to, the minister said clean fuel in 2017. Dream on, dream. It's not going to happen.
John, one more point from you before we go back to the audience.
Well, I mean, again, it's a technology thing. We have fuel theft. I mean, that's a big thing. Also cross borders and so forth. And again, that's something one can manage. And I'm not sure what the statistic is, but I guess it's a fair part of the overall cost.
What, theft?
The theft of fuel.
What percent would you estimate it at?
I don't know if
10%,
anybody's got a
30%?
guideline, but
it depends on how you manage it, but I know one of our companies had a technology that sort of managed fuel theft, and even companies that thought they were doing it exceptionally well still had sort of 5 to 10% fuel theft. So it is a big issue.
Let's go back to the audience. Another question there. Yes.
Good afternoon, Morne from CarTrack. I just want to find out, in Gauteng we currently have the e-tolls as well now. How does that influence logistics in South Africa?
And I suppose part of that is if there's going to be more tolling down the line, how much it's going to affect it, isn't
100%.
it? Who's up on that?
I'll give my 2 cents worth on it talks to all the regulations that keep coming, and Patrick alluded to it. I think once again that disconnect where we have, I think there was that little outcry about the driving hours of trucks shouldn't drive during peak hour traffic, and it lacks engagement. How many of us as consumers are affected by the e-tolls? As business, it just makes the cost go higher, and who pays for that? The consumer at the end of the day. So I thought it was quite funny that you said you were a very satisfied consumer, that your goods were in shops on time, but at what cost? At what price? You see the rising cost of baskets.
Well, that I don't think about.
I'm assuming you're an urban consumer. There's a huge rise in the informal sector, and how efficiently are we servicing that? I think that's a major challenge we have.
Yeah.
So e-tolls just add to the cost which we all of the country, and which we all as consumers end up paying for.
I think what I'm saying, and my comment wasn't a thoughtful one.
Yeah.
It was, I'm doing something else, I'm not thinking about that. But I suppose it's saying it's good enough for enough people not to complain.
You see it working.
Enough. Not great, but enough.
No, but I do think we have, in South Africa, we have a dichotomy. We have absolutely outstanding world-class systems and processes, and we have a dearth of shambles on the other side. And I mean, that's a dichotomy of our country.
Maybe on tolling, one of the things that we sometimes forget is if you look at the road network in the 80s, and you look at Gauteng-Durban, which is our main sort of gateway into our economy, it was a single lane with many stops. And through an initiative by SANRAL at that point to put really a high quality road infrastructure in with a toll behind it.
From the beginning?
Yeah, from the beginning. We've been able to create infrastructure that we wouldn't otherwise have, and we do need to take that into account. The e-toll is a different kind of debate because that's around a whole cities and acceptability to consumers, but certainly between cities and making our national economy work, tolling has been hugely successful.
All right. Let's go back to the audience. Another question over there? Yeah.
My name is Livingston from MAN Truck and Bus. In the panel, we had how technology is supporting logistics, and we also had that logistics is about people. So the question here is, what is the industry doing to ensure that there's better interface between man and machine? When we look at vehicles in particular, there's an element of driver where the skill set of drivers are maybe far too low compared to the technology that is available. So how is what is the industry doing to ensure that there's better interface between man and machine?
Well, let's start with John on that one.
Well, I think training is a big issue of drivers. There are a lot of drivers out there who are very inexperienced and or poorly trained. I mean, we've had sight of that in certain of these major accidents that have occurred in the last year. And this is not new. This is rather the older part of our telematics technology, and that is simply monitoring driver behavior. But I think a newish offering of CarTrack's is, for example, driver camera. And not only does that give you visibility of the driver in the road ahead, which actually can exonerate the driver often who's blamed maybe falsely for bad driving behavior, but also offers the ability to assist the fleet manager in training the driver. So there's a whole coaching scenario that can go behind that, as well as the basic driver behavior from standard telematics. Now, if that's put into proper practice, you can easily identify poor driving behavior, inexperience, poor skills. But whether the transporter has the will to do that or not is another question.
Kate, you obviously do have the will, and then I suppose people would say, well, how much time and money do you spend on training?
A lot. I think, obviously, we have a lovely saying is that anyone can buy a truck, but it's still people that make the truck work. And if you're going to put someone in a 2 million rand asset, you're going to make sure that they're well skilled and trained and know how to drive it, not only for your protecting your own asset, but themselves as well as the lives of people on the road. So, and we have many drivers across our business, and there's a huge dearth of that skill in the market. So all drivers get trained continually. Every single depot of ours has a dedicated, if not 1 or 2 driver trainers who are continually monitoring the drivers. All the beautiful systems that are there are in our vehicles, from drive cam to, we actively 24/7 are monitoring driver behavior. So if a driver's braking too hard, or we notice he or she is falling asleep, they proactively get phone calls. We monitor sleep time, proper rest, driver hours, all hugely critical. And I think what's really exciting is we're getting into a stage where you can start predicting. So it's predictive analytics, predicting behavior.
All right, I need to, not because we don't want to talk about this, but there's a time issue, and I do want to touch a bit on Africa. The rest of the continent and South Africa's role. If we're the leader, if we're better than they are at the moment, then we need to show the lead. And I think of the story of Randgold Resources, the gold mining company in the country of Mali, where they have built roads for the country. They've been partners with government. They're not a business that's just gone in and saying we want to mine over there, build us a road. And they are doing very well. They are one of the shining stars of the JSE at the moment, this company. A gold company, unfashionable, but a very effective company. So the question, Patrick, is business in South Africa doing enough to help the country with its infrastructure problems, and not just say, look, we want good roads to drive on, to simplify it?
Is business doing enough to South Africa or in Africa?
Both. And I'm thinking of the lead now. Are South African companies saying, let's take the lead in Africa?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think one mustn't underestimate Africa and the expertise that is up there. Certainly, one of the Bala World companies, Manline, has got in wonderful copper haulage, and they're sending up top class vehicles up into Zambia, suffering a bit now with the closure of mines. So the vehicles going in there are good, but don't underestimate them. I was at a Zimbabwean conference last year with all the operators, gave a talk. I was amazed. I said, I thought I was going to come here and find the biggest bunch of ignoramus people. I said, you guys are actually very good. They operate very well. I was speaking on Skype to a friend of mine who was very active down here. He's in managing transport up north now. And he says, Kenya, Tanzania, Ethiopia, booming, good transport systems, all suffering road infrastructure, okay? But he says South Africa is actually going off the map. Now that worries me. He says South Africa is not actually mentioned much anymore. We're no longer the golden boy on the African bloc. And that's a bit concerning. So, okay, are we taking our we have the expertise up here, but let's not underestimate the quality of the operator up there. I think the big thing where we go wrong is see the bloody rubbish trucks they send into our country from overseas. But their systems there, they're up to, and yep. So I think we must start looking at Africa and learning a little bit from them.
Andrew, you also paid to take the bird's eye view of our businesses in South Africa and on the continent. What are they doing for the continent?
Look, I think a lot of South African logistics service providers have come with these suite of very effective solutions, and using those in Africa to expand their market has been effective. And as Africa becomes more consumer orientated, there is a need to enhance trade between trading blocks, between different countries. There's also a lot of, as you've said, effective operators that are probably ripe for the taking in terms of creating a more, instead of a country-by-country approach, creating a continental approach to logistics. At this point, there's probably still logistics being operated by a number of smaller companies, as opposed to South Africa, which stepped away from that 2-3 decades ago, and we had these bigger players that have emerged. Not necessarily to dominate, but to offer a more complex array of solutions. And I think that's where Africa will probably be going in the next decade or so.
Well, unfortunately, we've just got a bit of time for 2 final comments from the remaining panelists, whether it's on Africa or the bigger picture.
No, I think with regard to Africa, I think an interesting example is Nigeria. We've got an operation in Nigeria, and it's a chaotic road system, but the clients that we've got there are world class in their expectations and their demands, and their service delivery intentions are actually world class, and it's quite an eye opener to see that's
John, I'll have to stop you there to give Kate the last minute.
Thank you. Last day, always. I think, firstly, I hate saying the word Africa. I think our lesson is every country is different. There's certainly South Africa is not always the leader in that. We've taken skills there, but they're great people on the ground, and you need to work locally with the people, with the government, with the regulations, with the... Every country has its own idiosyncrasies which you need to understand, but you need to work with the local people to be successful, and I think you can be extremely successful. But maybe the last perception is that there's huge rewards to be made in Africa and higher returns, and I think that's false. I think you've got to be very practical and real. And we do have fancy technology and fancy solutions, but typically the solutions need to be much more practical and basic at the moment.
We'll have to end Driving Forward there. That's all the time that we have for this edition. And thanks to my guests for joining me. John Edmeston, Deputy CEO of CarTrack. Kate Stubbs is Executive Head of Marketing at Barlow World Logistics. Andrew Shaw, Transport and Logistics Leader for PwC, South Africa. And publisher and editor of Fleetwatch, Patrick O'Leary. And a big thank you to our studio audience as well. And from us, for this time, goodbye.